Hey, New Haven, Connecticut, one of the oldest cities in America, tucked away in the southern part of the state. It's home to the legendary Yale University, and that gives the whole city this dense intellectual energy. A rare kind of quiet that you don't find in many places. But in 2021, right here on these streets, a shocking case captured the attention of the entire country. What started as what looked like a routine traffic accident quickly unraveled into something far darker, a murder planned down to the smallest detail by someone who left absolutely nothing to chance. The killer executed this scheme with such cold precision that there wasn't a single loose end. And if it hadn't been for one unexpected twist of fate, this might have gone down as the perfect crime, unsolved forever. So what really happened? Let's go back. February 6th, 2021. It was a Saturday evening, and the night had completely settled over New Haven. Around 8:30 p.m., in a quiet residential neighborhood, the kind of area known for being safe, mostly home to Yale students and faculty, the stillness was suddenly shattered. At the intersection of Nash and Nickel Streets, a dark blue SUV slammed hard into the back of a silver sedan that was stopped just ahead of it. Car accidents happen, especially in winter, when the roads get slick and icy. So a rear-end collision on a cold February night isn't exactly unusual. The impact wasn't catastrophic, but the noise was jarring enough to pull the attention of nearby residents. The driver of the silver sedan stepped out of his car and walked toward the SUV, the completely normal thing to do after a fender bender, just trying to exchange information. But the moment he approached, the SUV's doors swung open. The driver stepped out, and without a single word, fired 2 shots directly at him. The victim dropped immediately, crying out in pain, and the shooter didn't stop. He walked right up to the fallen man and fired 6 more shots at close range before getting back in the SUV and calmly driving away, leaving the victim bleeding out on the cold pavement. Residents called 911 almost immediately. New Haven police were on the scene within minutes. By then, the SUV was long gone. All that remained was a man lying in a pool of blood and a silver sedan with its hazard lights still blinking in the dark. The victim was identified as 27-year-old Kevin Jiang, a Chinese-American man. The shooter had fired 8 rounds total. 6 of them hit Kevin, mostly in the face and upper body. Investigators determined right away that these were close-range shots. Whoever did this wasn't just angry, they were deliberate. As the only child in his family, Kevin Jiang had carried the weight of his parents' hopes from a very young age. He excelled academically all the way through college and then pushed even further, earning a spot in Yale University's prestigious master's program in environmental science. But his story didn't stop in the classroom. Kevin was also a lieutenant in the U.S. Army National Guard, the branch of the military made up of part-time and full-time reservists who step up during state and federal emergencies. He was in incredible physical shape, deeply committed to public health, and had even launched his own YouTube channel where he shared tips on healthy living. By any measure, Kevin Jiang was the kind of person who had it all together. Sharp mind, strong body, clear sense of purpose. And the way his friends described him, he was just as impressive as a human being. Calm, warm, the kind of guy who walked into a room and made everyone around him feel a little better. Nobody who knew Kevin could have imagined that someone like him would meet such a brutal end. Through interviews with people in the neighborhood, police were able to piece together a rough description of the suspect. The driver of the SUV was a tall man, dressed all in black, wearing a dark knit cap. What made it even more chilling, after the shooting, he didn't panic and flee. He lingered. He stood there, seemingly making sure the victim had gone down before calmly getting back behind the wheel and driving off. Security cameras from a nearby house did catch footage of the 2 vehicles colliding just before the shooting. But between the poor lighting and the glare off the glass, police couldn't make out the license plate or get a clear look at the shooter's face. That one gap in the footage was enough to bring the investigation to a grinding halt right out of the gate. Shortly after, officers went to Kevin's apartment to deliver the news to his mother, who lived with him. When she heard that her only son was gone, just like that, she collapsed. She and her husband had divorced years earlier, and she and Kevin had been each other's whole world. They had leaned on each other through everything, and now, in an instant, he was gone. The grief was total, devastating in a way that words can't really touch. As investigators kept reaching out to Kevin's circle, they learned that he had spent part of that evening with his fiancée, Perry. Perry was 23 years old, and she was remarkable in her own right, a bachelor's degree from MIT, and currently working toward her PhD in biophysics at Yale. The two of them had met about a year earlier at a church event. They both loved the outdoors, hiking, climbing, being out in nature, and with so much in common, things between them moved fast. They fell hard for each other, and it showed. Perry walked investigators through everything they had done that day, every detail of what turned out to be Kevin's last hours. That afternoon, the two of them had gone ice skating and ice fishing together. They even caught a decent-sized pike, one of those big, aggressive freshwater fish you find all across the northern hemisphere. By 3 in the afternoon, they headed back to Perry's place and cooked up the fish they'd just caught for dinner. After that, they made a quick run to the supermarket to pick up a few things around the house. By 8 p.m., Perry walked Kevin out to his car, watched him pull away, and went back inside. She mentioned that the spot where the shooting happened was only a few hundred meters from her front door. She heard the gunshots clearly. But by that point, more than half an hour had passed since Kevin left, so it never even crossed her mind that those shots had anything to do with him. Perry didn't want to speak publicly about losing Kevin, and she didn't go into further detail about that night. She said simply that she wanted to hold on to the happy memories. And she believed at the time that whoever did this had acted randomly, just a senseless, terrible thing, which made it all the more heartbreaking. Because just 1 week before Kevin was killed, on January 30th, the two of them had just gotten engaged. A friend had been there with a camcorder to capture the whole moment. Out in the snow, beside a waterfall, Kevin, a little nervous, a little bashful, pulled out the ring he'd been holding on to, got down on one knee, and asked Perry to marry him. She burst into tears on the spot, happy tears. She said yes without hesitation, and they held each other tight while the camera kept rolling. When Kevin announced the engagement on Facebook, he didn't hold back. He wrote, "You are the kindest, most beautiful, most tolerant, most patient, and most loyal woman I have ever met. My love for you is difficult to put into words." Friends and family flooded the post with congratulations and well wishes. Everyone was so happy for them. And now, all of that, every bit of that beautiful future they had planned together, was gone. What should have been wedding planning had become funeral arrangements. As the investigation continued, police noted that Kevin's sedan had a fresh dent in the rear from being hit by the SUV. At first, detectives considered the possibility that this was road rage, one of those situations where a driver just loses it behind the wheel. But the more they looked at it, the less that theory held up. The shooter fired 2 rounds first, dropping Kevin where he stood, then got out of the vehicle and walked up to finish the job with 6 more shots at close range. That's not a snap decision made in the heat of the moment. That's not road rage. That's a plan. Every single thing about this crime pointed to someone who had thought it through, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Police started digging into Kevin's personal life, his relationships, his social circle, anyone who might have had a reason to want him dead. What they found was the opposite of what you'd expect in a murder investigation. Kevin was deeply religious, regularly volunteered with the homeless every month, and by all accounts, almost never had conflict with anyone. He simply didn't make enemies. And yet, despite all of that, the investigation stalled. Weeks passed with no significant leads, no clear direction. The case had hit a wall. In the meantime, the community rallied around Kevin's memory. Nearly 700 Yale faculty members, students, and local residents came together for an online memorial in his honor, a testament to just how many lives he had touched. A week after the murder, Kevin's funeral was held. The church was filled with fresh flowers. Because of pandemic restrictions, in-person attendance was limited, but over 450 people tuned in through a live stream to pay their respects. When Kevin's mother got up to speak, she couldn't hold it together. Through her tears, she called her son the greatest gift God had ever given her, and it wasn't hard to understand why. Kevin had worked hard, saved up, made smart investments, and eventually bought a home in New Haven, and then turned around and invited his mother to come live with him. He once put his hand on his chest, looked her in the eye, and told her, "I will always take care of you, don't worry." Those words, full of love and quiet confidence, would never be fulfilled now. Before she spoke, Perry read aloud a poem Kevin had written for her during his lifetime, a window into their love, tender and painfully short. She said that 2020, the year she met Kevin, felt like a year chosen by fate. At the end of her remarks, she said her final goodbye to him in Chinese. It was one of the most quietly devastating moments of the entire service. The case had drawn enormous public attention by this point. New Haven Mayor Justin Elliker went on camera, promising that law enforcement would not rest until justice was delivered for Kevin and his family. But the case also ignited a broader conversation about public safety in the city. People pointed out that even though it was only February, New Haven had already seen 6 shootings in 2021 alone, a troubling spike in violent crime. There were calls for police to crack down harder on illegal firearms. Others noted, more critically, that part of the reason Kevin's case received so much coverage was the so-called halo effect of being a Yale graduate student. And in the absence of a clear motive, conspiracy theories started circulating. Some suggesting the killer had been radicalized by pandemic stress and had targeted Kevin out of some kind of group-based hatred. But as investigators dug deeper, the real shape of the case began to emerge. Police discovered that in the 3 months leading up to Kevin's murder, there had been 4 separate drive-by shootings targeting homes in New Haven. The last of those incidents happened on the very same night Kevin was killed. Nobody was hurt in those 4 shootings, just property damage, but ballistic analysis revealed something critical. All of the bullets recovered were .45 caliber, roughly 11.43 millimeters. And they matched the caliber of the 6 rounds pulled from Kevin's body. More than that, forensic testing confirmed they had all been fired from the exact same handgun. 1 weapon, 5 incidents. The same shooter had gone from targeting buildings to targeting a person. The urgency to find this individual had never been higher. The New Haven Police Department joined forces with law enforcement in surrounding jurisdictions and launched a coordinated investigation. And almost immediately, a new lead surfaced that pointed them in a very specific direction. Around 11 a.m. on February 7th, the morning after the murder, the North Haven Police Department, just one town over, got a call from a local restaurant. Staff had discovered a blood-stained black bag and a blue plastic bag dumped beside a dumpster out back. When officers opened them up, what they found inside stopped them cold. 3 license plates, a yellow reflective jacket, a gray knit cap, a handgun with several loaded magazines, and 10 boxes of .45 caliber ammunition. Once the handgun was confirmed as the murder weapon, tracking down its owner became the single most important priority in the entire investigation. But it wasn't just the gun that caught investigators' attention. Some of the other items in those bags, the jacket, the black bag, the blue plastic bag, rang a bell. Because police had seen those exact items the night before, here's what happened. Around 9 p.m. on February 6th, the same night Kevin was killed, a security guard at a scrapyard on the outskirts of New Haven called in a report about a suspicious dark blue SUV that had pulled into the lot and just sat there. Officers responded, and their body cameras captured everything. The driver was a 30-year-old Asian man. He was cooperative, even smiled when officers approached. Sitting right there on his car seat, a yellow reflective jacket, a black bag, and a blue plastic bag. On the surface, nothing looked out of place. The man's story, though, started shifting almost immediately. First, he said he'd bought the car. Then he changed it, said he'd rented it. He couldn't produce any paperwork to back either claim up, and he couldn't explain why. He told officers he'd missed a highway exit and accidentally driven onto snow-covered train tracks, where the SUV got stuck and couldn't move. Officers ran his information. The man's name was Pan Kin Xuan, 30 years old, 6 feet tall, about 165 pounds, a PhD student in computer science at MIT. People who knew him described him as a genius, but also deeply introverted, not someone who connected easily with others. When police checked his license and ran his record, they came up clean. No priors, nothing. So they didn't push further. They called a tow truck to pull his SUV out, and they even helped him book a hotel room for the night. It wasn't until the report came in about those discarded bags near the restaurant that police put it together. The items dumped beside that dumpster matched almost exactly what they had seen sitting on Pan Kin Xuan's car seat the night before. And when they checked the map, the restaurant was just steps away from the hotel where they had booked him a room. That was enough. Officers went to the hotel immediately to follow up and found that Pan Kin Xuan had never checked in. He had also never gone back to pick up the towed SUV. The tow truck driver, it turned out, had already sensed something was off. While loading the SUV onto the truck, Pan Kin Xuan had repeatedly tried to climb up onto the tow truck, despite being warned over and over again how dangerous that was, clearly desperate to get something out of the vehicle. The driver kept pulling him back, kept warning him, but Pan Kin Xuan wouldn't let it go. Eventually, the driver had to physically restrain him and drag him away from the truck. When investigators got inside the SUV, they found a reddish stain on the gear shift. DNA testing confirmed it was Kevin Jiang's blood. And then came another critical piece. The front license plate bracket of the SUV was an exact match in shape and size to the dent on the rear of Kevin's sedan. The bracket had made that dent. Everything was lining up. Pan Kin Xuan was officially named the suspect, and the investigation shifted into a higher gear. There was some public backlash over the fact that Pan Kin Xuan had been allowed to walk away during that first encounter with police. Some argued it came down to a failure in internal communication. The scrapyard where Pan Kin Xuan's SUV got stuck was about 4 kilometers from the murder scene. And the two locations fell under different police jurisdictions, so no one immediately connected the dots. There were also reports that investigators had misread a witness description early on. Witnesses said the shooter was wearing black clothes, but police allegedly interpreted that as a description of the shooter's race, which led them to initially overlook Pan Kin Xuan as a possibility. The police chief, for his part, didn't directly address those specific allegations, but firmly maintained that every officer involved had done their job. Residents were frustrated. They were critical. Looking into Pan Kin Xuan's background, there were some surface-level similarities between him and Kevin. Both were Chinese American. Both had been high achievers their entire lives. Both had learned to play piano. Pan Kin Xuan had even performed a solo at an MIT orientation ceremony. Kevin, meanwhile, had posted videos of himself singing and playing instruments on his YouTube channel. But when investigators talked to Kevin's friends and family, not a single person recognized Pan Kin Xuan's name. They were all certain Kevin didn't know him either. So if Pan Kin Xuan really was the killer, what on earth was his motive? Why would he go after someone he had never even met? At this point, police had concluded that Pan Kin Xuan was armed, extremely dangerous, and on the run. They put out a $5,000 reward for information leading to his arrest. When that didn't move the needle, they doubled it to $10,000. Police searched Pan Kin Xuan's family home in the suburbs of Boston, where he had been living with his parents. He was already gone. Phone records show that in the days following the murder, Pan Kin Xuan had been calling his parents repeatedly, asking for money. At one point, he met his father at a shopping mall and walked away with $28,000 in cash. While the manhunt for Pan Kin Xuan intensified, investigators also began quietly keeping tabs on his parents' movements. But without enough hard, direct evidence to guarantee a conviction, police shifted part of their focus to another angle, the dark blue SUV. Tracing the vehicle's history revealed that it had been stolen. Pan Kin Xuan had taken it out under the pretense of a test drive and simply never brought it back. 2 days after the murder, on February 8th, police issued an arrest warrant for Pan Kin Xuan on charges of larceny, and with that, a grueling manhunt began. What made this pursuit so uniquely difficult was who they were chasing. As a PhD student in computer science, Pan Kin-Xuan had a level of technical sophistication that most fugitives simply don't have. He was using 3 separate cell phones and constantly registering new numbers to stay ahead of any trace. He also knew how to disable the GPS on whatever vehicle he was driving, a capability that threw up serious roadblocks for investigators trying to pin down his location. At a gas station in North Carolina, police found one of his cell phones. It had been smashed to pieces, completely destroyed, no usable data left. Then, on February 11th, Pan Kin-Xuan resurfaced in Georgia, alongside his parents. He was wearing a large, unusual-looking black backpack. All 3 were together in the same car. Police tracked them down and moved in to intercept, but when they got to the vehicle, Pan Kin-Xuan wasn't there, only his parents. They claimed they had no knowledge of any murder, and that Pan Kin-Xuan had simply gotten out of the car at some point and gone off on his own. Both refused to say another word without a lawyer present. His mother even hinted, darkly, that her son might have taken his own life. Surveillance footage told a different story. After the interaction with police, Pan Kin-Xuan's father went into a nearby store, bought a laptop, and handed it off to a man whose build was a very strong match for Pan Kin-Xuan. They weren't done helping him. Meanwhile, back in the lab, the forensic case was coming together. Pan Kin-Xuan's fingerprints were lifted off the handgun recovered near the restaurant. Gunshot residue was found on the discarded yellow jacket, and most significantly, skin cells belonging to Kevin Jiang were recovered from the gray knit cap. The physical evidence was mounting. Now they just had to find him. Police widened the net even further, and an Interpol red notice was issued for Pan Kin-Xuan on suspicion of murder, meaning law enforcement agencies around the world were now on alert for him. The manhunt had gone international. The breakthrough finally came in May. Pan Kin-Xuan's parents showed up in the state of Georgia and checked into a hotel. His mother, visibly exhausted and worn down, slipped into a corner of the hotel lobby, leaned against the wall, and borrowed an employee's phone to make a call. The whole thing was caught on surveillance camera. She deleted the call history afterward, but it didn't matter. Police were already watching. They traced the call, identified the number on the other end, and tracked it to an apartment in Montgomery, Alabama, 1,700 kilometers from where Kevin Jiang had been shot dead. Investigators were confident. Whoever was in that apartment was almost certainly Pan Kin-Xuan. They moved immediately. Given that Pan Kin-Xuan was believed to be armed with illegal firearms, this wasn't a situation anyone was taking lightly. 20 officers were deployed to the scene, fully geared up, positioned all around the apartment building, ready for whatever might come. They were prepared for a violent standoff. Instead, the door opened, and Pan Kin-Xuan walked out on his own. "I am the person you are looking for," he said. He had been renting the apartment under a fake name, Henry. When officers searched him, they found $19,000 in cash, 7 SIM cards, a laptop, and his father's passport. He was taken into custody on the spot and extradited back to Connecticut shortly after. And when police sat him down to take his mugshot, something unsettling happened. A strange smile crept across his face, the kind of smile that made everyone who saw that photo deeply uncomfortable. After the arrest, the question on everyone's mind was the same: why? What could possibly be the motive? The answer, it turned out, had been hiding in plain sight on Facebook. It emerged that 5 years earlier, Pan Kin-Xuan and Perry, Kevin's fiancée, had been Facebook friends. They had both been students at MIT at the same time. And up until just a few weeks before the murder, the two of them had still been exchanging messages. More telling than that, Pan Kin-Xuan had added Perry's account to a priority list, making sure he would never miss a single thing she posted. That kind of behavior doesn't come from casual friendship. It pointed to something far more obsessive. When Perry found out that Pan Kin-Xuan was the one who had killed Kevin, she was completely blindsided. She was clear that there had never been anything romantic between them. They were barely even friends, more like acquaintances. But she did acknowledge that Pan King-xuan had made his feelings known on more than one occasion. He had suggested video calls. He had reached out to congratulate her on graduating from MIT. Every time, she had shut it down. Based on all of this, investigators were able to reconstruct what had been going on inside Pan King-xuan's head. He had quietly, privately harbored feelings for Perry for years. And alongside those feelings, a slow-burning jealousy toward Kevin Jiang, a man he had never once met, had been building in the background. When the engagement was announced, something in him snapped. That jealousy boiled over, and he made his decision. To make the whole thing look random, like Kevin had just been in the wrong place at the wrong time, Pan King-xuan had first carried out a series of drive-by shootings targeting homes across New Haven, a deliberate smokescreen. He then stole an SUV and swapped on commercial license plates to hide its identity. On the day of the murder, while Kevin and Perry were out on their date, Pan King-xuan was outside, watching, waiting. The moment Kevin drove away, he fell in right behind him, then engineered the collision, deliberately rear-ending Kevin's sedan to force him out of the car so he could walk up and kill him at close range. The whole thing had been choreographed. And if that SUV hadn't gotten stuck in the snow that night, leading officers straight to the evidence sitting inside it, police might never have given a second look to a seemingly unremarkable acquaintance of Perry's. This case could very easily have gone cold. The COVID-19 pandemic threw another wrench into the process, pushing the trial date back repeatedly. But those delays actually worked in the prosecution's favor, giving them more time to build an airtight case. Even before the trial started, Pan King-xuan's defense attorney was candid about how difficult it was to work with him. The defendant was evasive, uncooperative, and hard to communicate with in any meaningful way. As a result, the court ordered a psychiatric evaluation, which pushed the start date back even further. The assessment eventually came back clear. Pan King-xuan was found to be mentally competent and fit to stand trial. To eliminate any risk of him reoffending, escaping, or fleeing the country entirely, the court set his bail at a staggering $20 million. Nearly 2 years after Kevin's murder, in early 2024, the trial finally got underway in New Haven. Pan King-xuan faced charges of aggravated murder, fleeing justice, and interstate vehicle theft. The prosecution laid out their theory that this was a crime driven by romantic obsession. Pan King-xuan said nothing about his motive. He denied everything. Throughout the proceedings, he sat with his head down, almost completely silent, day after day. Witness after witness took the stand, placing Pan King-xuan at the crime scene and in the surrounding area at the time of the shooting. Police presented dashcam footage tying the handgun directly to the murder. Prosecutors made clear they had spent a significant amount of time assembling what they described as an overwhelming body of evidence. More than enough to prove guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. The judge agreed, affirming that Pan King-xuan had a clear and direct connection to Kevin's murder, and that this had been a deliberate, carefully premeditated crime. And yet, even staring down all of that evidence, Pan King-xuan refused to budge. He maintained his innocence. He insisted it wasn't him. The courtroom was packed with Kevin's friends and family, there to see this through to the end. Kevin's father stood up and spoke about his son, a young man who had loved life, who had been a devoted Christian, who had every reason to believe his best years were still ahead of him. All of that had been ripped away. He looked at the court and said he hoped justice would be done. Kevin's mother tried to speak, but the grief was too heavy. She couldn't get the words out. A relative stepped in and read her statement for her. She had loved Kevin and Perry together. She had pictured her son getting married, having children, building a family, all of them together, happy. None of that would ever happen now. She would never see her son smile again. Then came the turn nobody expected. Whether it was a crisis of conscience or a calculated move to soften his sentence, in February 2024, more than 3 years after the murder, Pan King-xuan suddenly changed course. He confessed. He said he was remorseful for what he had done and the pain it had caused. He apologized to everyone affected. He said he would accept whatever punishment the court handed down. In April 2024, the verdict came. Pan Kin Xuan was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to 35 years in prison. His driver's license was also permanently revoked. He is currently serving his sentence at the Cheshire Correctional Institution in Connecticut. As for his parents, though they were widely suspected of helping him evade capture, prosecutors ultimately couldn't build a strong enough direct case against them, and neither faced any criminal penalties. Kevin's family received the verdict with a sense of exhausted relief. His mother, through her tears, said, "I have waited for this moment for so long. Finally, the day for justice to be served has come." When Perry stood up to deliver her statement, something strange happened. Pan Kin Xuan, who had spent the entire trial with his head down, lifted his eyes and stared directly at her. Perry didn't look back. She told the court that while she felt the sentence was less than what Pan Kin Xuan truly deserved, she also hoped that he could find God's mercy. After everything, Perry chose to turn back toward her future. She completed her master's degree and continued her PhD at Yale, focusing on protein science research. She stepped away from public life entirely, no interviews, no appearances. She said she wanted her personal life kept private, completely out of the spotlight. And in her heart, she carried something she shared quietly but clearly. She had only ever wanted to marry Kevin because she knew she would never find anyone better. And so, what was designed to be a flawless crime, engineered by a genuinely brilliant mind, ultimately fell apart because of one thing: a car stuck in the snow. All of Pan Kin Xuan's careful planning, the decoy shootings, the stolen vehicle, the fake plates, the burner phones, all of it unraveled from that single moment. Justice was slow. It was hard fought, but it got there. This story is more than just a murder case. It's a stark, unsettling reminder of what can happen when envy and obsession take root in a person and are left to grow unchecked. How a brilliant mind turned in the wrong direction can destroy not just one life, but many. Kevin Jiang is gone. The void he left behind, in his mother's heart, in Perry's life, in the lives of everyone who loved him, will never fully close. And while 35 years behind bars is the law's answer, it can't give back what was taken. It can't rebuild what was shattered. So hold on to the people you love. Don't take a single day for granted. That's all for today. We'll see you in the next one.